Hello and welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, where we sit down with experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and marketing director at Osprey Approach. And today I'm joined by the founder and CEO of Hive Risk, a boutique risk management consultancy advising law firms and legal tech companies on compliance and risk management. Our guest is also the founder of the Lawyers Retreat and the Great Big Legal Offsite, networking events aimed at leaders to strategize, collaborate and network. And important to say, former litigator and head of compliance in various law firms across the North. I'm excited to welcome Kate Burt. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here with you, Amy.
So today we'll be discussing how to build a resilient law firm. We'll cover the fundamentals of what it takes to be a resilient business today across risk management, tech, succession planning, leadership and more, taking inspiration and advice from Kate's extensive career and experience working in and with law firms. So Kate, I guess we'll start with your background and your experience as to what's led you to where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So when I am a solicitor, and now early on in my career, I was very much the traditional solicitor's route. So you get your A levels, you get your degree, your law degree, LPC, training contract route. So in the sort of the first decade or so of my career was very much following paint by numbers on the legal career, how you're supposed to become a solicitor or how you were at that point. My background was as a litigator, because when I qualified and did my training in Liverpool, actually, because I'm very much northwest, is where my roots are. It was the slip trip capital of the UK, Liverpool at that time. So all the opportunities around personal injury litigation. So I trained in a firm that was heavy on litigation, personal injury, and then when I qualified into it was more on the defendant side of litigation. So I was acting for insurance companies. So I'd worked with Berriman's Lace Moore, Keogh's, and others at quite a senior level. So I almost see my career in two halves at this point so far. It's that sort of very traditional, proper lawyer for more than a decade, actually. And then it was around 2016 that really the entrepreneurial itch could not be silenced anymore, that I had to kind of take the route into something a little bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what a great foundation to be the perfect assistant and guidance for law firms now. Like you've been in it, you've been there and done it. So tell us a bit about your business today and how that's grown over the last few years.
Yeah, so I think I was at a really unique point at that time in 2016 that I stepped away from traditional law and started on the road to build what is Hive Risk now. It wasn't starting out as an idea that this is what I want to build. It's very much been an exploratory, follow the breadcrumbs journey to what we've built today. But essentially what we have today in Hive Risk, we, as you mentioned, a boutique compliance business, but we are 15 strong. We've got a team of 15, and we service law firms all across the country, from top 10 UK law firms all the way to sort of sole practitioners on all aspects of their risk and compliance. So we essentially, for some firms, we are their entire compliance team. So actually outsource that, and it's quite varied in the work we do. But the actual building to that point, it was perhaps accident rather than design. And you sort of follow the breadcrumbs as to, okay, there's a niche in risk and compliance. I can lend my hand to that. And to a certain extent, in the early days, I was self-taught on risk and compliance. It was around the time that GDPR was about to become effective. So that was a really great foothold for me, actually, because of my legal background, was I can read legislation, I can interpret legislation, and I can present to others what this legislation means for them. So really drawing upon all those years in litigation where I'd have to build a case and interpret laws and regulation to maybe insurers or the courts and build a case in that way. I used all those skills to draw on, okay, what's happening with the legislation in data protection, and then simply set up stall, if you like, on LinkedIn, to say that I can help in this area, and literally went out lecturing to small businesses, very much used my online presence to reach my audience, and became known in the industry as someone who will openly speak about compliance. But it was a journey from that point, starting from sort of interpreting GDPR to actually being equipped to help law firms with really complex compliance, because you just don't know what you don't know at that point. I thought compliance, and genuinely I thought compliance for law firms was read the code of conduct. If I read the code of conduct for solicitors, I'll know it. And I quickly realized that there was more to it. There's anti-money laundering, there's cybersecurity, there's professional indemnity insurance, and all the nuances that come with that to apply it in practice. And that was a real learning curve for me.
As I was putting the research together for this podcast, and I was putting the questions and topics that I was going to share with you, I sort of struggled to find something that seemed enough, because of course I want to talk to you about the world of compliance. That's what your bread and butter, but I also want to talk to you about your advice for succession planning and tech and culture, because I've heard you talk about that before, and I know you're super passionate about it, and ultimately that's what makes a successful modern law firm. So as I was doing my research, I came to realise that what sits at the heart of everything you do is actually about resilience and building a resilient business. And it's those skills and operations and processes that allow you to become adaptable and durable. So I guess my plan for this conversation is to share with the law firm leaders that are listening your insights from working with firms and working in law firms, but also building your own business, about what it takes to be a resilient leader and a resilient business. So I like to do some quick takeaways right at the beginning. If we can start with 3 fundamentals for building a resilient law firm.
I think in terms of the 3 fundamentals, you've got to have the vision of what you're all in it for. Like, there has to be a why. What is this law firm in business for? What is this, any business? What are we doing it for? And really having that very clear vision on where we're going. So, and that's a strange thing for a compliance person to say. And I'm pulling upon this because of my experience building a business as well. So we've got to know why we're in it. So having that vision, and then once you know what you want to achieve, you've got to have, obviously there's got to be a route to market, and someone want to buy your thing or your service. But presuming that's all in place, in terms of being resilient, you've got to have be really strong on keeping the work coming in. So your sales and marketing functions got to be strong. Once you've got the work coming in, or you've got a pipeline of work, you've got to make sure you're servicing that work well. So having the right experts to deliver that work, and make sure that the quality's there, because otherwise you will lose clients. And then on the finance side, you've got to make sure your cash flow is managed, is the word. And we can go more into cash flow after this, because I think that's a really unique challenge for firms. That the money that you're making from your delivering your service, how are you charging the right amount? Are you keeping that money? Are you spending it on overheads? What do you do when the tax bill's due? So all those 3 areas, that service delivery, sales and marketing, and finance and operations, they all have to be strong for you to be resilient. If any one of those is off, you're not going to make it in business. So if the pipeline dries up, but your work's really good, you're not going to be successful in business. If your service is really good and the work's coming in, but you're not charging correctly, or you're not keeping a tight reins on that money, you're not going to do well on business. So it's like the 3 legs of a stool to keep resilient in business as a minimum.
Absolutely, as the absolute fundamentals. And I will pick up on your first point about having a vision. We've had a lot of law firm leaders and business leaders join us and talk about a similar thing. And I guess it can be seen as a luxury and a nice to have, but actually I'm learning from talking to other people on this podcast that we have to start there, and it has to be effectively communicated, because if we're not all in this thing together, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and a term I learned from working, because I've skipped over this in my sort of potted career history, but while at the very start when I was building High Risk, I went sort of in-house as a subject matter expert or risk and compliance for a tech company, servicing the law firm market. And you hear so many different terms and concepts in that fast-moving tech environment, which is completely alien, or was completely alien to my law firm upbringing. And one of the terms that has stayed with me is the North Star, that we all working towards this North Star, and that's where we're going. And everything that we need to be doing needs to be pulling us towards that North Star. And that's something that I brought into our businesses. Where's the North Star? And as long as what we're doing is heading in that general direction, we're on the right course. So it's almost like a litmus test is what's that North Star. And it's helpful on a number of levels. One, for the leadership to know you know strategically in the right direction, but also when you communicate that North Star to the rest of the firm, they can get excited and energized about where we're going as a business, and also see what's the point in it all. So perhaps it could be that maybe the admin or processes can get a bit laborious, let's say, but if you can instill, well, the reason we're doing this is this North Star, and if we don't do those things, we don't streamline and we don't make things efficient, we're not going in the right direction to that North Star. So I think that's important for the direction of the business, but also you can use that same analogy with compliance. Why are we doing this compliance? We're not doing it just for the bureaucracy of doing it, the sake of doing it. It has to be for the best interest of the business, and explaining to staff as to why compliance is essential for the business success, not just a barrier to business success, which is
absolutely.
really important thing. And if you can crack that, it is difficult. If you can crack that and win the hearts and minds of the staff and the board as well, you really are on a really good place in terms of compliance.
Yeah, it makes your communication so much more easier if you're always pinning it back to your values and your North Star, like you said. And actually something that Simon McCrum said in a previous episode is it helps you to know what to say no to and what to put on the back burner. Like, it's not just about what opportunities you take, but it's about what opportunities and ideas you don't take. I think that's just as crucial.
100%. And also there's something that comes up time and time again, is taking no risk in business is taking a risk as well. So it's having that, if you stand still and you don't take that job because that's too risky, or you don't make that move because it's too risky, and you become stagnant and everyone else is innovating and moving, and you're going to fall behind. And if you, in fact, standing still is falling behind in that environment. And for us, when we're working with law firms, we're very much, and this is one of our USPs that really sets us apart, I think, from other consultancies, is we start with the commercial approach. As a business, what's your risk appetite? As a business, what are you comfortable with? Where are you going? What are your goals? And then once we understand the motivations for them commercially, then we can say, okay, with that in mind, here's the tools on compliance and here's your options, really, as opposed, so as an example, if you're wanting to take on a client and there's AML risk, you want to think about, who are we as a business? What sort of client do we want? Are we comfortable with having overseas clients? Some firms, yeah, we are, great. Some firms, not really, that's not really our bread and butter. It's outside our expertise. So it's understanding who the firm is to then find out where's your risk appetite. And then once we know your risk appetite, we can advise on the approach on compliance, because it's not black and white for a lot of things. For some things, it's like sanctioned individuals or whatever, of course, but with other aspects of compliance, it's very much a gradient.
It's really interesting that, I guess, what you were saying there is, to be resilient, you need to be able to take risk, and to be able to take the risk effectively, you need to know where you stand on that. I think that's a really great point, because I guess as resilience, I said the word adaptable before, and that means that sometimes you have to change course and you have to pivot, and you have to be able to know where you stand on being able to pivot. So I guess I haven't considered risk as part of being resilient, but I guess it's about having the right processes and understanding in place for you to make those decisions. And you mentioned there you start with the commercials, and that was, of course, one of your three legs of the stool is your business and your marketing and your pipeline. Can you expand on that and what you mean by starting there? And where would other firms typically start, I suppose? What's the typical traditional?
I think it's looking at, I think some firms don't look at it at all.
Mm,
They just look at, is more at work when if it's not. But it's having a really clear idea. So I'll often use anti-money laundering as an easy, tangible example. But say we'll go and we'll talk to a firm about their firm-wide risk assessment, or known as their regulation risk assessment. That's where we always start when we're looking at anti-money laundering. So when we're starting to say, right, is your firm-wide risk assessment right? We'll always try and first understand who you are as a business, what market do you serve, what's your client base. So understanding what their core offering is, and then being really clear on that and what falls outside of that. So maybe if they're doing high-end commercial property, they wouldn't go near low-end residential property, for example. So it's really understanding who are you as a firm and what kind of work do you want to do and not dabble. And then once you know that, then you work through, okay, with that unique set, that new unique profile, what are the risks that present to you? And this, we talk about money laundering, but this applies to any risk in business because everything's a risk. So what are the unique risks that faced us based on that background? And then you work through it one by one. So it could be, for example, taking it to a very granular level. Okay, we don't meet any of our clients face to face. Right. Okay. That works. That's in the business model because you digitized and your clients aren't local. That's fine, not a problem, but there's a risk there because you're not meeting them face to face. So how do we mitigate that risk? So you have your policies and procedures. How do we risk assess those clients? How do we identify those clients? So you've got your policies and procedures, and then how do we best use tech to help? How do we use technology to further, one, mitigate the risks, and two, make what we do really efficient and strong and scalable? So that's typical, and then we'll work through all the different things, but it's always with that lens. Who are we? What are the risks? How do we make that risk safer? And how do we make that risk safer and the business more efficient?
yeah, absolutely.
What are our tools available to do that?
Yeah, you joined us on our Build Better Habits series a couple of months ago, where we were joined also with Eloisa, head of compliance in a law firm. And she said the same thing, like you can't avoid risk, but you need to make sure that you're prepped for all these things. If you don't have this documented and aligned with your business goal, then that's where the trouble starts. I just want to touch on your third leg of the stool in building a resilient firm, and that's cash flow. You said that's obviously a unique standpoint for firms. Do you want to just expand upon, I guess, what the fundamentals are in that? Where do they start in? And how do you know if your services are priced right? I guess that's a great question.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in there. So we start on cash flow particularly, and I feel this every day because as a business owner, and you look at and you can see why it's a cash flow roller coaster, because when you see the graph, it literally looks like a roller coaster, and that's normal in any business. The money coming in and the money coming out are not perfectly aligned. So you're going to have periods of low tide and high tide, I call it, and it's knowing that is inherent in business, that there will be cash flow fluctuations, and having those strategies to manage that. I don't mind sharing, but as for Hive Risk, we've built the business to this point without external investment. We've bootstrapped to this point. And so that is why I have a keen eye on cash flow to make sure we can we're not in any debt, and we don't have any outstanding bills. It feels like a confessional, but just to say that is why I'm my fingers on the pulse with cash flow, because I need to know that we are within our means. But that's not to say that something might happen beyond our control that might mean it doesn't work this month. And for that reason, if we're ever at that point, and we're lucky enough that we have Tom Blandford, who's our fractional finance director, who steers us through the storm, any storm, is we keep it closely reviewed, we keep it closely monitored. And I know I've got a big red button if I ever need to push it, that Tom's lined up for us a facility if we ever need it to, X £1,000, whatever. So for me, I can sleep at night knowing that yes, there's fluctuations, but I've got a strategy on that.
Mm.
So if it the ends don't meet, I've got this button I can press, which I don't want to press it because I quite like not having any sort of debt with the business. But also it's always thinking about, okay, what's coming down the line, and working with Tom on that. So he produces us monthly reports with forecasts and budgeting. And in fact, it was as we were growing as a business, one of our first appointments was Tom, probably before we needed him, to say, we want a really strong financial grounding here, because our vision is big, we are going to grow, and I don't want to have to be unpicking bad habits 3 years down the line when it's a lot more stressful. So let's get Tom in now as finance, so that he can keep us straight on that. We also, I had the same rationale when we brought in our operations director very early on, probably before we could afford her, and also Gavin as our technical director. One of the first 3 key hires there before we built the business to what it is now, but knowing that those foundations are just so strong, need to be so strong if we're going to be resilient in business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not, they're no longer a nice to have, they're a must have. And like you said, it is all about not unpicking bad habits. If you can get the fundamentals in straight away, then you're setting yourself up for the best path of scalability and efficiency and quality. Just to know, Tom will be a guest on our podcast in some upcoming episodes. So yeah, I get to pick his brain on how perhaps he's helped you and helps other businesses have that stability. But I guess that also goes back to, you outlined that as a potential risk. You knew you wanted to grow, you knew you wanted to be ambitious. So, you've put things in place to make sure that you avoid that. This may be a difficult question based on how big those topics are, but do you have 3 quick wins perhaps that law firm leaders could implement today to improve their resilience in any of those areas?
I think the easiest thing you can do to improve resilience in those areas, if you don't already have that expertise in-house, is look at fractional offerings, look at outsourcing that. And we do that with our HR department, finance, IT department. So even when we didn't have the money, we could afford those because it's fractional, and actually you're then supported by the experts, rather than say get one, or perhaps say, for example, not, there's very good practice managers, but maybe if you say, right, we'll get a practice manager and they can do all of that, and there is more of a generalist, you've not got the expertise that you could get at maybe a similar cost, by using strategically these fractional offerings. There's also operations. You can have that fractionally now as well. So there's so many options there at quite a low cost base. And as you grow as a business, their offering can grow and scale with you. So I would say that's a real sort of top tip for me if you're struggling and you don't have those key operations, which are so expensive.
Yeah, and we know hiring talent, whether that be law firms themselves or additional talent, is super hard. And I also think one of the things we spoke about with talent and skills is getting that outside help outside of being a law firm in the legal sector. And actually, if you have that fractional help, it might be somebody who has expertise in a lot of sectors and can influence and improve things that you never would have thought of, because you're so in the legal sector, you might not have thought of something that could really benefit your business. So I know for you, skills and leadership and that is such a core part of your discussions and what you're passionate about. Because of course, I saw a recent LinkedIn post that you've launched a lawyers retreat with Kirsty Pappin, who has been a previous guest of ours. So definitely check into that episode. But in your post, you wrote, the need for visionary leaders has never been greater. I sort of just sat with that for a little bit, and I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that? And how can an aspiring law firm leader be that visionary leader? What do you need as part of that skill set?
Yeah, so the need has never been greater because there's so in the rise of AI, the rise of the innovative tools, the changing way that consumers want to consume legal services is completely different to what it used to be. And in terms of that traditional law firm model will die out. There may be some pockets of it left in years to come, but it's going. So to be that in law, you need to be at the forefront of what you're doing and have the vision to bring that to the marketplace. And there's so much to learn on AI can be a minefield. There's clients wanting to pay in cryptocurrency, and there's so many different things. Digital marketing, it's an absolute minefield. So law firms really need that strong visionary leader to navigate the risks of that and also the opportunities, to really harness the opportunities, because now more than ever there's the opportunity to actually, as a small law firm, to actually make a big impact by tapping into the scalability of tech, by tapping in a unique way to strategic partnerships. And I think that's why it's such a fertile breeding ground to create something great where we are now.
Yeah, you make a great point. We're not restricted by size necessarily anymore, by resource, because like you said, you can get these fractional skill sets involved. So you have that absolute best of the best expertise, and you can utilize tech to scale and grow, and you can utilize AI to scale and grow. So actually, the smaller you are, you might be able to be slightly more nimble and more adaptable and therefore more resilient. What skills do you think you need to be a visionary leader? What do you need to be thinking about to be that leader that law firms need today?
I think you've always got to be working on yourself as a business leader. As you know, how can you show up better? How can you clear away the noise so you can see the vision? And I'll speak from personal experience there, and it's a lifelong journey really to clear the noise and to refocus. But I think you've got to kind of sign up for that journey if you want to be a visionary leader. And so in some ways it's unsatisfying because you never reach the goal, because there's always, as soon as you get near the top of that mountain, there's another mountain that you need to climb. And to be that visionary leader, you have to just hone your skills and work on your skills and not be afraid to fall down and get back up. In fact, it's part of it. So not taking yourself too seriously, to think you have to be perfect, and seeing it as a strength that you're not perfect, but get the right people around you and just keep going. Is my main advice really. But I think
Yeah, I think that's good
I've got to be,
advice.
I think sometimes you've got to be built for it, built for the fight, because
Mm.
just aren't built for the constant knocks, the constant, it's never done, there's always more. And also in terms of the ideas, they need taming as well. Any
Yeah.
typical visionary, you'll have 10 ideas a day, not all of them good. So you need that discipline to not just run after shiny things as well. And I think that's it within high risk. My natural tendency is I've got ideas going off all the time, but it's being disciplined in that, and I've got a very strong board that who I respect and they respect me, and I actually feel a responsibility for them not to jerk them around, to actually bring to the table solid ideas. So I won't tell them half my ideas. It took me a while to tell them about the lawyer's retreat, actually, because I was thinking I don't, because I have sort of ideas like this quite frequently, I don't want to bring it to them until I know it's got legs, because otherwise
Mm.
they'll, if I say look over there, they'll look, whereas actually that could be distracting for them. So I'm much more disciplined than I used to be when I was younger, is to say, okay, I'll ruminate with that on my own, and then if it's got legs and if it's in the best interest of the business, then I'll share it with the firm, because I don't want to overwhelm them to follow shiny things, because they've got their own things to sort of focus on. That's a real struggle, actually.
It's a great bit of advice because we said earlier about saying no to things, I guess, from the team. Maybe your team has an idea, or we get a new client that looks shiny but actually doesn't really fit the bill. But I guess as a visionary leader, when you're having all these ideas, you've got to be pretty strict with yourself and go, no, that's taking us off course, that's taking us off the path.
We had one, and I try not to give any clues away for anyone who might recognize the scenario, but we were presented with a big opportunity recently, and it was, you know, from a vanity perspective, it would be great to just, oh, let's just do it, let's do it. It'd be great to have under our belt, but going through, right, what's the impact going to be on our business? What's the profitability actually going to be? How far is it taking us away from our goals? Actually, we turned down, or we didn't fight for the opportunity, because just really having that really sensible eye to, which is this a good opportunity for us? So that was kind of it was a difficult decision, but a measured decision, and I think ultimately the right decision to turn down this shiny opportunity, which, you know, was it the right decision? Wasn't it? We won't know, will we? And that's the fun of it all, is that you don't really know. When you take different paths, you don't know whether it was the right path, because what would have gone, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's where the resilience comes in as well. And you've got to be prepared to make the wrong decision. You're making the decision in that moment based on the things that you know. If it turns out to be, I mean, I don't think any decision really is the wrong decision, is it? Because once you've made that path and that course, you're aligning yourself to that and moving forward. So I guess that again comes back to the resilience to know that whatever does happen, you can pick yourself up. You've got the right people around you, the right skills around you to continue where you want to go. I realized I took us off course when I asked you 3 quick wins, and we've dived into skills, but skills is definitely number one. Find the right skills around you. Do you have any other quick wins to help with resilience?
Yeah, with resilience of the business, or as the business leader?
Either, to be honest.
Yeah, I think with resilience as a business, you need to have your eyes and ears open and horizon scanning as well, to see what's coming down the track. Something that I've always remembered is a conversation I had with a practice director years ago when I was a head of risk, was when we were looking at risk, and he said, it's not about there being a issue or something bad happening. The issue is if it never occurred to you that it could ever happen.
Mm.
It's knowing, you know, when something goes wrong in business, things will always go wrong, but why did we not know it was going to, you know, why would we not know there was a risk that could go wrong? Because if you know that that's a risk that it could go wrong, but you're actually, either you've put steps in place so it doesn't, or you've assessed it and think, do you know what, on a, you know, now we've assessed it, we know it's a risk, but it's a low risk and the upsides are bigger. So if that happens, well, that's the chance we took. But not knowing that that issue is there to fall over is the problem. So being resilient is knowing that things will fall down, but you having assessed the landscape and being prepared to, if that goes wrong, well, that's part of doing business. We knew it was always a risk, and not beating yourself up about that.
Yeah, it's that awareness. I'm sure it's somebody super famous, and I can't remember who it is, but the quote is to work on the business, not in the business. When you get to that position as a leader, you need to make sure you're working on it and not fighting the fires in it. Because again, yeah, horizon scanning of, is this a potential risk? What are we coming up against?
And having levels of always delegating down through the organization. So, and that being a constant movement of work. And we've done it in our own business as well. So at one stage it was purely just me doing everything, because there was only me in the business. Then you bring on a sort of ops director, right? What can I get filter down? But then that goes through all the business. So even when we've got, you know, our claims analysts, compliance analysts, what can they then filter down? So we've recently got, Justine's now, our ops director's got a personal assistant as well. So it's always, what can we delegate and elevate, you know, to bring ourselves forward. As someone, I don't know, many people watching might know, Dan Warburton talks a lot about delegation, and he talks extensively about that. And I did work with Dan for a period of time when we were just getting started. But that, for that reason, is I knew I couldn't do it all on my own. So we'd need to delegate down. So I think if you're a business owner and you're holding on to everything and you're not letting go, that is a real vulnerability in your resilience long term. You might be all holding it all together now, fine, but it may, you know, as you scale, that's not sustainable. It's just not humanly possible. So to stay resilient, you need to be thinking, how can you always sort of delegate down?
Yeah, because I guess you delegate and then almost mitigate that risk, because if multiple people are responsible and it's not all sat on your head, we never know what's going to happen the next day. If there's multiple people aware, responsible, skilled up for these scenarios or processes, then you're mitigating that potential risk of it sitting in one pot. Yeah, definitely. I'm intrigued as because you said over a decade in law firms as a litigator, as a solicitor. What had you wished for, or what did you wish for from the leaders at those firms that perhaps you didn't get and that you would have loved to have received that could help law firm leaders right now?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough. I was in really great firms, and so I was at over the course of my career, I was at 3 top 50 law firms, and they ran pretty tight ships on the operational side. And in fact, it's only now building my own business, I say, that's why they did that. That's why I did that. So, for example, one of the big firms, they would always look at sort of KPIs and key performance indicators and financial hygiene, they'd call it. So you'd go through, and it was very systemized, actually, the process of how the staff delivered their advice was very processed in those firms. As a fee earner, as a solicitor, and as an entrepreneur and a closet creative, I hated that. I hated and it was a well-run firm, but I didn't like it because I don't like to be too contained and I don't like process. But it was a perfect firm for someone like me, because if there were 100 of me doing what I wanted, the firm wouldn't run in the way it needed to run. So actually, on the flip side, a lot of firms could actually learn from those firms to run a good business. But there's the frustrations I had with those big businesses as a solicitor was that I didn't feel my entrepreneurial or business skills were valued, and that may not have been true, but that's how I felt. Or my creativity wasn't valued, and I just felt that my value was wrapped up in the billable hours and keeping clients happy, which of course is important in those environments. But the side of me that actually is the magic of me in business, the entrepreneurial, the visionary, was completely squashed. So for me, I probably wasn't built for that role, to be honest with you. But looking at it and thinking, well, you know, what do I know that I could tell other business owners, because we work with a lot of other law firms as well, is actually do systemize your business.
Mm.
And for those creative lawyers, create opportunities for them, whether it's networking, help them, you know. And I actually did do this in my previous firm, but we launched a publication for clients, insurer clients, about industry news, trial wins, and I loved all that. But create for those closet creatives, have a creative outlet for them in a different way that is still valued, because otherwise you're going to lose those really creative, innovative leaders that could actually take your business to the next level. What they will do instead, and what they do is they'll either go out on themselves, because it's much more flexible in how you can operate as a solicitor now as it was then, but they may join a platform law firm and be a consultant on their own, which is not, there's good platform law firms out there, absolutely. But if you're a traditional law firm, you don't want to lose your talent for that reason. So to look
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
your solicitors as individuals. And also, again, I was spoiled with the technology in the firms that I was in, but in some firms, if you have sticky in a negative way, if you have tech that's not working, it's clunky, solicitors or any member of staff and the organization can't get on with their work because the technology isn't working, you're going to lose staff, the morale is going to be low, profitability is going to be down. So invest in tech to make the job nicer for the firm and also the client experience as well. So it's
Mm.
really important.
Yeah, like and we talked about talent previously, and not everyone will take the risk to set up on their own or do what you did and set up your own business, but you you don't want them to feel negative about the way that they are right now. If they want to stay in a law firm and they want to work with you, but they feel that those talents are squashed. I love that idea of having an outlet, whether even that's just a feedback session that you get people involved in to have ideas about the business. I talked to a previous managing director who have hackathons. Typically, that's a tech idea to have a hackathon, but they had it in like a business idea sense of how can we improve efficiency, how can we improve service quality and employee satisfaction. So I think that's a great part of building a resilient business and making the use of your team. Like they've all got great ideas, they've all received service, they're going to be able to impact how you deliver yours.
Absolutely. And seeing the solicitor or the individual, anybody in the law firm as a whole being, as not
Mm,
just someone that's churning out work. And that all leads into culture as well. And then we go back right the way back to where we started with vision and setting the vision for your business. And we were talking about business goals, but what are your values as a business? What culture are you creating? Because then that leads into how you interact with your people and how the opportunities that you present for them so that their culture is right rather than it being stagnant.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And we know culture sits at the heart of everything. It determines how people behave. It determines what people prioritize. It determines how people react to compliance processes as well as service quality. So, yeah, culture being at the heart of a modern resilient law firm is definitely key. And so is tech. You've mentioned that a few times now that obviously you've got a bit of a tech background and tech forms a heavy part in your compliance guidance. What role does tech play in building a resilient firm?
I think it's absolutely huge in terms of building a resilient firm on so many levels. So one, and the key one actually, is the efficiency of how you operate as a business. So how you can standardize your processes to make it really efficient, because where there's friction, that costs the business more money, essentially. So that's the real key aspect of it, to have the right tech in so things run smoothly. Also on just taking it a bit more niche in terms of the compliance angle and compliance, why technology is good for compliance teams, is that with the standardization, you'll improve compliance, but also some of the tools out there are also doing much more to keep you safe by doing the extra checks on maybe it's client due diligence or sanctions checks, for example. Without technology, if you don't have that technology at all or not reliable technology, you're not in a very positive position, because you're potentially going to miss things. So doing things the traditional way, and there's some firms still doing this where they're for ID verification, maybe the client's coming in with a passport and just think how much time, and sometimes that's appropriate in any firm depending on the client, the demographic of the client, and also your business model. But if you're trying to scale a business, that's not an efficient way to collect ID, for example. So just improving compliance on file reviews, for example. We know if we go into a firm that's using, household name case management system, household name AID tools, we know that already they're going to be in a good shape. They might not have run something correctly, but in the main, we're going to know how to find things, where they're going to be. It's firms that, well, maybe they're using lots of different technology that overlap, or there's a hybrid between paperwork and tech, and there's no real standardized way. It's very difficult to audit that. And so if it's difficult for us to audit, it's difficult for law firms to manage and have that oversight of having that finger on the pulse within the business to say, how are we doing on compliance? What state are our files in? If you're not using tech in a smart way, you wouldn't know. Without, well, you could probably say we know we're not in a good place. That's as far as you could say, I think.
That's the certainty that you've got, is that you're probably not on top of everything, which is obviously, of course, not where you want to be. And then we mentioned tech from an AI opportunity point of view, from a scalability, new opportunity, taking you somewhere else, taking you to the next step. I guess that forms a huge part of the resilience piece.
Yeah, and there's so many exciting things going on in that space now, and it's sort of anything's possible at this point, and we're just on that start of the journey. But in terms of service delivery, how can we sort of improve our services that absolutely wow our customers at lightning fast speed with AI that can sort of read documents and understand and interpret documents so quickly and package that up in a way that's ready to present in seconds. So I think the opportunities there for law firms to do that in a safe way is there to really enhance that customer experience, that client journey, and also how they deliver their services as well. So things that could take hours and hours for in-house teams to produce, using AI in the right way can just shave hours off that, and weeks in some circumstances. And I think we touched on pricing before, but I think there's a good argument there, or debate to be had, about where you create efficiencies within your business. Does that mean that you then lose money because you're not charging on an hourly rate, for example? And I think the pricing of services needs to be looked at again. I'm a big advocate of moving away from the billable hour, and actually the value of that service that you're delivering to the client shouldn't be based on how long I've sat and looked at it, because it drives the wrong behaviors, in my view, for the business. And also you could actually package something up using tech, which takes seconds, and you can produce quite quickly for the client, but actually there's huge value to the client. So that should be, in my view, should be factored into the pricing, and there shouldn't be a shame around that. I think that's a corner that firms need to turn away from the hour to look at actually technology, because I actually have heard of firms say, out of my earshot, or maybe just in my earshot, is that it's a deterrent to use AI, because then what happens to the billable hour? And I think that's the wrong question to be asking. It's, let's start with a blank piece of paper. How do we now look in this new technological age? How do we now look at pricing?
Yeah, don't restrict yourself by what we're already doing to avoid taking on those new opportunities. And we've had Sean Jardine, the absolute guru of value-based pricing, in a previous episode. So yeah, I think a lot of us could all spend hours talking about that. But you're right, and also that forms part of the tech angle on your service, but also from your marketing and business development point of view. So pulling back on those three legs of the stool to build that resilient firm. If you've got the tech in place, that can help you attract new clients and new talent, and then help you deliver that service on the top of that. You mentioned, of course, you've worked in some great law firms, and I'm sure you've worked with some great law firms. What behaviours do you see in those successful competitive law firms that separates them from the rest, that really puts them one step ahead?
Think having that eye on them wanting to be the experts in the field is that quality and that pride that comes with the quality. And then with that quality, that then filters down to, one, the delivery of the service is always top notch. They want to be the best, but so their processes need to be the best. So it really is that eye on quality that really does, in my view, sets those firms apart. And they see compliance particularly, and the whole business, as something to get right for the good of the business, for the longevity of the business, and also there's the pride there as well, because if there's something not right there in the business, how does that reflect on them as a firm? If something goes wrong, they hit the headlines. It's very embarrassing for the firm, on reputational, and sometimes fines involved as well. So the firms that want to get it right want to do that to keep the business strong and healthy, as opposed to, we're going to get hit by a fine from the SRA. We better do this. It's
Yeah,
more,
and I guess
we want to do
having
this.
that yeah, that focus and pride and hunger for quality impacts everything. It has an impact on the culture, on the people that you hire and retain, on the clients that you attract and retain, on the compliance structures and operations and tech you invest in. It quite literally impacts every area of the business, which I think through this discussion is clear that that's what you need to build a resilient business. All those arms of the stool need to be there to create a modern law firm. I know we have touched on risk and compliance throughout here, but I can't not touch on specifically before ending the conversation. What best practices would you implement to ensure a resilient risk management strategy or compliance culture in particular?
Yeah. So I think again, it starting with the leadership team. And starting from the beginning, who are we as the I know I feel like I'm repeating, but it is kind of 101 is who are we as a business and what are we wanting to create? So not just, okay, where are we not compliant? What sticking plasters do we need to put on? It's like stepping back, thinking as a whole on risk and compliance, where are we now? Where do we want to be on our compliance journey? And it is a journey because there's no compliance done. It's a journey. There's no such thing as 100% compliance, but thinking, okay, where are we now? Where do we want to get to? We always start off with policies and procedures once we know what they want. So have you got the right framework in terms of the documentation saying what they need to say? So getting the right, whether it be anti-money laundering or cybersecurity or business continuity plan, getting those framework documents right and accurate, getting the buy-in from the board that that's what we want to roll out. And then it's training the staff on those new policies. Now, it depends on the size of the firm as to this might be a whole change management piece, and it might take 6 months to get one policy rolled out, or with implementing with this tech required as well. It could be a 12-month project. Depends on the size of the firm, but really those getting the framework right, and then implementing that so everyone understands it and it's workable, and then reviewing how it's working. So some kind of method to review, and that could be file review, it could be any other type of review to see, is that working? And it being a constant cycle of okay, who are we as a business now? What do we want to be as a business now? And looking again at, is our compliance framework fit for structure? Fit for purpose. So
I think that's a great framework for any sort of idea or change or process management, is making sure that you've aligned it with your business goals, documented it, communicated it, trained upon it, and then review it. I think that's a great sort of structure for any sort of business process. And I guess that's how you've been so successful with Hive Risk and how you've managed to grow and be where you are today.
one of the other things which I don't think I've mentioned already, which we implemented right at the start of our business, is an enterprise operating system, which is a system of work. It's not a tech system, it's a way of work. We follow Traction, which is if you get a book by Gino Wickman called Traction, and it's a whole right to looking at your visions, but also right people, are they in the right seats? Are they working in within their unique ability, and also all the way up to like, how do we structure our company goals? What should our weekly meetings look like? So there's a whole book on how you can operate as a business, which actually just makes it all click in and work like a machine. So my one top tip really for any business owner who's listening and they think, well, do you know, everything's so chaotic, is have a look at something like Traction, because it just brings it all together in like in a very paint by numbers way, actually. And we run off EOS, you call it, run off EOS at Hive Risk, and that's been really game changing for us.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not a glowing recommendation for that structure, I don't know what is, but we love a book recommendation. So thank you for sharing that and for sharing your expertise and knowledge across the sector and all these many topics that make a resilient leader and a resilient law firm. So thank you so much, Kate, for joining us today. Really appreciate your advice and guidance.
Thanks, Amy.